The radar screen lit up, then vanished. Seconds later, a lone aircraft punched through anti-aircraft fire and disappeared into the side of a ship. There was no evasive maneuver, no attempt to pull away, just speed, impact, fire. Within minutes, decks were burning, ammunition cooked off, men jumped into the sea covered in fuel and flame. Damage control teams couldn't reach the blast zone. The aircraft had aimed for the bridge. This was not an accident. It wasn't a last-second mistake. It was deliberate. By late 1944, Japan had begun turning its pilots into weapons. Not bombs with guidance systems, but men with orders not to return. The strategy had a name. The targets were American ships, and the cost on both sides would be catastrophic. This was kamikaze warfare, and it marked the moment the Pacific War crossed a line it would never retreat from. In the autumn of 1944, Imperial Japan was losing a war it could no longer control. The empire's perimeter, once stretched across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, was collapsing under sustained American pressure. The Japanese Navy, once dominant after Pearl Harbor, was now shattered. Fuel was scarce. Aircraft production was falling. Experienced pilots were dead or wounded, replaced by trainees with minimal flight hours. Yet the demands placed on Japan's military leadership had not eased. The United States was advancing island by island, closing in on the Japanese home islands. Each loss tightened the noose. It was in this environment that Japan adopted one of the most extreme military strategies in modern history. The term kamikaze, translated roughly as divine wind, a reference to the typhoons that centuries earlier had destroyed invading Mongol fleets. In 1944, the word was repurposed. This time, the wind would not be natural, it would be human. The concept was brutally simple. Aircraft would be loaded with explosives and fuel, aimed directly at enemy ships, and flown until impact. The pilot was not expected to survive. Survival was not planned for. The aircraft itself became the delivery system. The first organized kamikaze units were formed during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944. By this stage, Japan's conventional air attacks were largely ineffective. American radar, anti-aircraft fire, and fighter cover made traditional bombing missions costly and inefficient. Kamikaze attacks were meant to solve that problem. A single aircraft flown low and fast could penetrate defenses and strike a ship at its most vulnerable point. Even a near miss could cause damage. A direct hit could cripple or sink a vessel outright. From a purely tactical perspective, the idea had logic. From a human perspective, it represented a breakdown of every conventional military boundary. Pilots selected for kamikaze missions were often young, many barely out of training. Some volunteered, others were pressured, and some were assigned outright. The line between choice and coercion was thin. Pre-mission rituals were formal and rigid. Pilots wrote farewell letters. They were given ceremonial headbands. Sake was sometimes served. In photographs, they often appear calm, even smiling. But post-war testimony suggests fear, confusion, and resignation beneath the surface. Once airborne, there was no return plan. Aircraft were fueled only for a one-way flight. Landing gear was sometimes removed to save weight. Radios, if installed, were used only for brief confirmation messages. The primary targets were American aircraft carriers, troop transports, and destroyers, ships operating close to invasion beaches. The timing was deliberate. Kamikaze attacks intensified during major amphibious operations when ships were clustered and preoccupied. At Leyte Gulf, the first waves shocked U.S. forces. Pilots had seen suicide before, individual acts, desperate pilots, but not at this scale and not as a formal doctrine. Anti-aircraft gunners described aircraft that did not flinch under fire. Fighters shot planes to pieces that kept flying, driven by momentum and gravity. Some pilots adjusted course at the last second to avoid wreckage already burning on the sea. The damage was immediate and severe. Ships were set ablaze, fuel fires spread across decks, aircraft loaded for launch detonated. Damage control teams worked blind in smoke and heat. As 1945 began, kamikaze attacks escalated dramatically during the Battle of Okinawa. Okinawa was critical, the last major stepping stone before Japan itself. Over nearly 3 months, more than 1,400 kamikaze sorties were launched. The U.S. Navy suffered its highest casualties of the entire Pacific War during this campaign. Destroyers on radar picket duty were especially vulnerable. Positioned far from the main fleet, they served as early warning posts. Kamikaze pilots targeted them first. Many of these ships were hit repeatedly. Survivors recalled the sound, a sudden increase in engine noise, then impact. Often there was no time to react. A single aircraft could tear through steel decks, explode below, and ignite fuel and ammunition stores. Some ships survived multiple strikes. Others did not. Despite the losses inflicted, kamikaze attacks did not stop the American advance. They did, however, slow operations, damage morale, and force changes in fleet tactics. Radar coverage was expanded. Combat air patrols were increased. Ships altered formations. New proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells were deployed. The United States adapted quickly. Japan could not. Aircraft shortages worsened. Fuel supplies dwindled. Training hours were cut further. Many kamikaze pilots were barely qualified to fly, let alone navigate complex attack routes. By mid-1945, Japan was planning for a potential invasion of the home islands. Kamikaze doctrine expanded beyond aircraft. Explosive-laden boats, midget submarines, and even human-carried charges were prepared. The underlying assumption was clear. Japan could not win, but it could make victory so costly that the enemy might reconsider. That assumption proved false. When the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan, the strategic equation collapsed completely. Kamikaze units were disbanded almost overnight. Pilots who had expected to die were ordered to stand down. Some reportedly wept, not from relief alone, but from the psychological whiplash of survival after preparation for death. In the aftermath, kamikaze warfare became a symbol, interpreted differently depending on perspective. In Japan, it was framed by some as ultimate sacrifice. Elsewhere, it was viewed as tragic, desperate, and avoidable. From a military standpoint, kamikaze attacks inflicted real damage. Nearly 50 U.S. ships were sunk, hundreds more were damaged, thousands of sailors were killed or wounded. But the strategy failed in its ultimate goal. It did not stop invasion. It did not change the war's outcome. What it did reveal was something darker: how total war can strip away boundaries until human life itself becomes a consumable resource. Kamikaze warfare was not an act of ancient tradition revived. It was a modern response to industrial defeat, a calculated decision made under pressure with consequences that echoed long after the war ended.